They were correct. Liz was indeed there, dancing with a man. Dancing was a loose description. Her arms were draped around his neck while his hands were on her backside. He whispered something to her, and she tilted her head back, her long hair cascading down. It was clear she was intoxicated. I approached them, gently removing her arms from his neck, and began to pull her away. "Hey man, what the hell do you think you're doing?" her dance partner demanded. "She's my wife, and I'm taking her home," I replied. Any defiance he might have had vanished instantly. "She's all yours," he said. "She's never a good lay when she's drunk anyway." "And when she's sober?" I asked as I lifted her to carry her out. "Oh, then she's amazing. Just ask anyone. We all agree she's one of the best." Someone opened the door for me and I carried her to my pickup, placing her in the passenger seat. It only took a few minutes to get her to her parents' house, where they watched as I unceremoniously laid her on her bed. She was out cold, probably already unconscious on the dance floor while being groped. Without saying a word, I walked out. Ruth was my older sister, one of my two sisters. The other was Esther Jacobs. I also have two brothers, Matthew and Luke Reynolds. My name is Mark Reynolds. Our parents were lifelong Southern Baptists, so all 5 of us children were baptized in Citico Creek, in Vonore, Tennessee, and grew up attending church every Wednesday evening and all morning on Sunday. We never had a TV, but we did have a radio, which was only allowed to play gospel music on Sunday. Of course, when our parents weren't around, all the hidden devices came out and we acted like normal kids. We were sure we kept them well out of sight of Mom and Dad, but I'm certain they knew about them. Our parents learned to read solely to read the Bible, and it was the only book they ever read. We grew up extremely poor, and all 5 of us kids knew early on that we wanted a different life from our parents. When each of us graduated from high school, we were eager to leave Vonore. Ruth and Matthew moved to Nashville, while Esther and Luke only made it to Madisonville. None of them attended college. Ruth, who always had a talent for cooking, started working as an assistant cook in a diner. Matthew attended truck driving school, where he had a stroke of luck. One of his instructors took a liking to him, and upon graduation helped him land a job driving for one of Nashville's megastars, a job usually reserved for well-connected, experienced drivers. Matthew proved to be an exceptional truck driver with a great personality to match. I was different. After high school, I attended Vanderbilt University on a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship. Upon graduating, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. After completing the officer basic course, my first assignment was at Headquarters 8th Army in Korea. I spent 13 months there before returning home for a 30-day leave, and then reporting to my next assignment at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I stayed with my parents for a few days before heading to Nashville to visit Ruth. Our brother Matthew was on tour, driving one of the trucks carrying the star's show equipment, including lights and rigging for a big Nashville performance. Ruth lived in a small apartment and I slept on her sofa. She was dating a man named Gerald Thompson, whom she had met in a cooking class at the local community college. Gerald had a sister named Elizabeth, known as Liz. The 4 of us went out for dinner one night, and later Liz and I went out on our own. We continued to see each other several times. By the end of my leave, Liz and I were in a relationship. Fort Campbell was only an hour's drive from Nashville, so I spent a lot of time there, and Liz also visited Campbell often. She liked intimacy in every way. On the 4th date, we had intimacy, and we didn't calm down for a second. A year and a half after we met, we got married. Liz was from Nashville and had never lived anywhere else. Her father was a urologist, and her mother was a housewife. Liz and I served 3 years at Campbell before going to Germany. Moving to Germany was a huge cultural shock for both of us. Liz joined the Rookie Club and the Officers' Wives Club, learned to play bridge, and played weekly with other wives. We also became members of the Travel Club and visited different countries every month, such as Italy, Switzerland, and Spain. In the last few months of our 3-year tour, Liz began to really enjoy European wines. On the other hand, I grew up in a non-drinking family, and have never been addicted to alcohol. Our next assignment took us back to Fort Campbell, which made us both happy. We moved into public housing and enjoyed 6 months of contentment. Then Liz started spending a lot of time in Nashville. We were going away for the weekend, and she wanted to stay for another day or two. This gradually extended to 3 additional days. By the end of the year, she was essentially living with her parents. I visited her on weekends. The first sign of trouble was that one Friday I went to her parents' house, but Liz wasn't there. They didn't know where she was. I left work early and arrived right after lunch. Her mother explained that they didn't expect me so soon. When I went to take my bag to Liz's room, her mother tried to stop me. "Let me get myself cleaned up first," she said. "It's all right," I replied. The room was a mess. Dirty clothes were scattered everywhere. It seemed strange that the bed was covered with dirty linen, although it was clear that it had not been slept on for at least a couple of nights. Her mother tried to put things in order. I apologized, saying that I needed to go to the bathroom. As soon as she left, I took my underwear out from under the bed. There were 2 more pairs, and I took them all. There were obvious traces of another man on one pair. I sat down on the bed looking at them. I took them to the living room. Her mother was on the phone but hung up as soon as she saw me. I picked up my underwear. "How long has she been sleeping with other men?" I asked. "I think that's something you'll need to discuss with her," her mother replied. I went back to the bedroom, picked up my overnight bag, put his underwear in a side pocket, and headed for the door. "Are you coming back?" her mother asked. I didn't answer and made my way straight to Ruth's house. Ruth and Liz's brother had dated a couple of years ago, but remained friends after breaking up. Since then, Ruth had met and married a music store owner named Eric Wyndham. Liz and I had returned to the States for their wedding. I called Ruth on my way to her house, and she told me where she had hidden a key. She was busy, so we couldn't talk much. She mentioned that she wouldn't be home until midnight because she had to close the restaurant that night. At her house, I tried to call Liz, but there was no answer, so I left a message. "This is your husband. You know, the only man you're supposed to sleep with. I would like to hear your explanation as to why that is no longer true. I would also like to know exactly how many others there have been and why." Eric came home around 7 and I updated him. Ruth called a little after 8. She told me she had just received a call from her ex-boyfriend, Liz's brother. He had just heard from a friend that Liz was drunk and flirting with a couple of men at the Count of Monte music bar. He was on his way to get her and take her home, but Ruth told him not to bother. I was there and would handle it. When I dropped her onto her bed, both of her parents were there. Her mother immediately started scolding me, blaming me for everything Liz had done. She said it was all my fault because I took her to Germany, where she learned to drink and do all sorts of terrible things. I glanced at both of them, then walked out and headed back to Ruth's house. Eric and I talked until Ruth got home, and then the 3 of us stayed up talking until after 3 in the morning. I slept on their sofa again. I woke up at 7, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat on their front porch, preparing myself to talk with Liz. Both Ruth and Eric joined me at 9. We talked for another hour or so. They wanted to know what I planned to do, and I told them I had no idea. It was after 10 the next morning when I rang my in-laws' doorbell. Liz's father opened the door and stepped aside for me to enter. Liz was sitting on the sofa with a cup of coffee. I walked over to her and dropped the soiled lingerie on her coffee cup. She picked them up, dropped them on the floor, then lifted the cup to her lips and sipped. "Why?" I asked Liz. "You don't have to answer that, sweetie," her mother interjected. "Stay out of it," I said coldly. "Why?" I repeated to Liz. She looked up at me. "I needed to be loved, and you weren't here." "How many times have you needed love and I wasn't here?" "What?" "How many times have you been intimate with other men?" "I don't know." "Guess." "A couple of dozen." "How many different men?" "I don't know." "Guess." 6, maybe 7, maybe 10, I'm not sure. Does our marriage mean anything to you? She lifted her head, looked straight at me, and took another sip of her coffee without answering. I walked out and went back to Ruth's. It didn't take long to tell them what happened. And she had no remorse, made no apology, Ruth asked. Nope. Man, that's one cold-hearted woman, she said. My thought exactly, I replied. There was no reason to stay in Nashville, so I headed for Fort Campbell. I was taken aback on Sunday afternoon when Liz walked into our house. I was lounging on the sofa, and she sat on the armrest where my feet were. She stayed there for a few minutes. I'm sorry, she said. Don't say another word. If the only reason you're cheating on me is because I wasn't around when you wanted intimacy, that's pretty pathetic. Considering that you intentionally stayed away from home to make sure that I wasn't around and I wouldn't be able to meet your needs. You chose to get drunk and sleep with strangers instead of coming home and being with your husband. That's a pretty weak excuse for wrecking a marriage, and your parents are just as culpable for letting you do this. The only thing you can do now is pack your things and leave. I don't want to leave. I said I was sorry. It won't happen again. I don't care how many more times it happens. As far as I'm concerned, we're no longer married, so you can do whatever you want with whoever you want. All I care about is you leaving. I picked up the remote and turned on the TV. She snatched the remote from my hand and hit the mute button. I'm not leaving. You're my husband, and this is my house. She threw the remote back to me and walked out of the room. She made dinner, but I had a sandwich and ate in the living room. She ate whatever she had prepared and stayed in the kitchen. Before going to bed, I took a shower and went to bed. She shuddered and climbed into bed, moving as close to me as possible. I turned away. Do you really think that I would never have slept with you after you had 6, 7, or even 10 other men? I apologize. And you think that's going to fix it? Yes. You really need help. I can't forbid you to sleep in this bed, but I don't have to stay here and think about all those men who were with you. I went into the living room and fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, she was sitting in an armchair and watching me. I ignored her, showered, shaved, put on my uniform, and went to work. After the report, I talked to my commander and informed him about the current situation. If I were you, I would start by consulting with a lawyer. Give it as much time as you need. That day, I spoke with several attorneys before choosing Kirby Dickinson. He was a retired Army lawyer and understood the challenges faced by military personnel. He asked, "What do you need from me and why?" "I need your advice because I'm completely lost," I replied. "Are you looking to save the marriage?" he inquired. "No." "Why not?" "Because she was unfaithful and I can't accept a cheating partner." "How do you know she was unfaithful?" I explained the situation to him. "That doesn't mean a thing in court, Lieutenant." By then, I was a first lieutenant. She could claim to have engaged in intimacy with both the Army and Navy football teams at a 50-yard distance with a stadium full of spectators, and then deny it in front of a judge. The judge would believe her unless you have solid evidence. He shook his head. "Those are the facts." He paused. "So since you don't want to save the marriage, that means you want a divorce. Am I correct?" "Yes, sir, you are." "And I'm guessing you want to make it difficult for her. Am I right again?" "Yes, sir, you are right." "Good, I appreciate when people agree with me. It confirms what I already know." "And what's that?" "That I'm a clever son of a bitch." We both laughed. "Here's my advice. If she's living with you, give her the cold shoulder. Ignore her even if she screams, yells, and throws things at you. Hopefully she'll end up leaving to stay with her mom or her boyfriend or just get away from you. When she does, she'll likely go back to her old ways and find someone else to sleep with. We just need to have someone there to capture it on film. Even if the judge rules that the video can't be used, he'll know you're telling the truth and that your wife did cheat on you. I can almost guarantee that the judgment will be in your favor. That's how it works here in Kentucky." One downside to this plan is that someone will need to be available 24/7 to record her activities, which won't be cheap. However, I assure you it will save you money in the long run. Are you on board with this? Definitely. Great. First, write a check for my fee, and then another for the detective I'll hire for you. I felt a mix of relief and financial strain when I returned to my office. Liz called me at 6 that evening, but as per Kirby Dickinson's instructions, I didn't pick up. I walked in the house after 10. She was there waiting for me. "How long is this going to last?" she asked. I've apologized. "Can't we just return to our normal lives?" I ignored her and went straight to the shower. 20 minutes later, after getting into bed, I heard her car drive off. I checked our shared closet and found most of her clothes were gone. I went back to bed and fell asleep. The next morning, I called Kirby Dickinson to let him know she had left, likely heading to Nashville. "Great! I have friends there. Do you have any idea where she might be heading?" I gave him her parents' address. "Great! Let's start the game," he replied. Less than a week later, I received a video recording of her cheating on me with 2 men. 48 hours after receiving the video, she was handed divorce papers that mentioned adultery. Less than an hour after receiving the documents, she called me in tears, begging for forgiveness. I hung up the phone. I informed my boss. He went through something similar a few years ago, although his situation was even worse because his wife cheated on him while he was in a war zone. Cheating on a partner who is in danger is undoubtedly the worst thing a spouse can do. My next step was to notify post housing that I was vacating the apartment. The next day I moved to the BOC, Officers' Dormitory for Bachelors. 3 days later, Liz called and said she couldn't get into the house. I told her it wasn't our house anymore. I moved out because she abandoned me, and as a lone officer I had no right to official housing. "But you are not alone. You're married," she objected. I laughed and hung up the phone. "I guess she's back in Nashville. As I mentioned earlier, I don't drink alcohol. It started with my upbringing in Southern Baptist families, and even as an adult, I was never able to develop a taste for alcohol. The same goes for profanity. I'm still not used to swearing. I'm calm about the fact that others drink and use rude expressions. It's just not for me. I'm not a prude either. Dancing in close company can be very exciting when you're with your wife or girlfriend. I appreciate women's forms, and I will be more than happy to see if she decides to demonstrate them. However, that evening I used all the 4-letter words I know and maybe even came up with a few when I watched a video of my wife cheating on me. I turned on the video on my computer. It all started with the fact that she was dancing on the dance floor with 2 men at the same time. All 3 of them performed actions that are usually performed in a private setting, for example, in the bedroom. The scene unfolded for several minutes as they left the dance floor, left the building, and got into the car. The detective followed them to an inexpensive 1-story motel where they checked into a room. He walked around the neighborhood until he found a room with an open window and curtains. It was unreal to watch my wife cheat on me. At first I wondered if she was intoxicated, but I couldn't tell from her speech. "Come on, guys," she said. "Show me what you can do." "I've never done this with 2 at the same time. It should be interesting." "It will be," the tall man replied. I turned off the computer. I couldn't justify her behavior. She claimed it was because she needed love and I wasn't there. I had no experience with adultery, but her excuse seemed incredibly weak to me. When I approached her, she didn't even try to deny it. Her parents knew that I had found the underwear and probably guessed the situation. They probably waited until the next morning to discuss it with her. So by the time I arrived, she already knew that her deception had been discovered. Last week, after watching part of the video, I felt relieved at work. I was busy all day, every day, which helped me forget this video a little bit. Kirby Dickinson called on Friday and informed us that we had an appointment with her and her lawyer on Monday. When I arrived, her parents were already there. I asked Kirby to inform them that we planned to show a graphic video and suggested it might be best if they weren't present. He conveyed this to Liz's attorney, and we saw him discussing it with the three of them. I noticed Liz shaking her head in disagreement and heard her say, "I don't believe them." All right, the gloves were off, and as Kirby had put it earlier, game on. It didn't take long. Her attorney insisted that adultery be removed as the grounds for the divorce. Instead, mental cruelty should be cited, arguing that I had inflicted so much emotional distress on her that she could no longer bear to be around me. This was supposedly why she had to practically live with her parents. Kirby and I exchanged glances. My computer was set up on the table with the video paused at the exact spot where I had left off. I addressed them all. "Elizabeth?" I rarely used her full name except to get her attention. "Are you sure you want your parents to see this?" "See what? Me holding hands with some guy? Or dancing with him? Go ahead, do your worst." I pressed play and the whole room saw her. "Stop it, oh my God, stop it!" She screamed loudly. Her mother was unconscious and her father was trying to revive her, keeping his eyes on his daughter. When the mother came to her senses, the father looked at her. "I want you to leave our house. Today." He and his wife didn't seem to have any problems with her cheating until they saw the extent of her debauchery. He carefully helped his wife up and headed out of the room. He stopped when he came up to me. "You shouldn't have done that, you know." "Would you have believed me if I hadn't?" I asked. "No, probably not. But there could be a better way." I was. Your daughter didn't have to cheat. We never heard from them again, and when the court date arrived, neither Liz nor her lawyer showed up. 6 weeks later, I was a free man with all our modest assets and no alimony obligations. Another 6 weeks passed before I received orders to serve in a Middle Eastern deployment. I spent 2 days with Ruth and her husband before heading home to visit my parents and siblings. I drove my truck to my parents' house, leaving it for my father to use and take care of while I was away. Matthew was on tour with his megastar, and my other 2 siblings remained in Madisonville, both married with children. I completed my year in the Middle East with nothing more than some unpleasant memories. However, I returned with a promotion to captain, which was a nice perk. My new assignment took me to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I was to command the garrison at the Command and General Staff College. It was a coveted position for any captain, but being assigned there as a very junior captain with no command experience seemed like an error. I even contacted my branch assignment office in Washington, D.C. to verify it. "Are you complaining, Captain Reynolds? Because, if you are, there are a couple of hundred other captains who would be eager to take your place." No, I'm perfectly happy. I just wanted to make sure someone wouldn't correct the mistake and reassign me in a few months." "No, Captain Reynolds. You're committed to this position for 3 years unless, of course, we need you back in the Middle East. If that happens, feel free to send one of those couple of hundred captains you mentioned in my place." We both chuckled at that. It didn't take long for me to settle into a comfortable routine, especially with the help of a seasoned first sergeant who managed things efficiently for me. One Saturday, I was at the auto repair shop on base, which had space and tools for us to perform minor repairs on our personal vehicles. There was also a skilled mechanic available for those who needed assistance. Although I wasn't a professional, having grown up in the country meant I knew the basics, like the difference between a spark plug and a lug nut, so I usually managed just fine. When I arrived, the shop wasn't busy, so I started changing my oil. There were 3 pits available for oil changes and working under cars. I had been in my pit for about 5 minutes when another car pulled into the pit next to mine. I didn't pay much attention until I heard a frustrated feminine voice exclaim, "Goddamn piece of shit." It was quiet again for a moment until I heard a wrench drop and hit the concrete floor. "Ouch, damn it," she muttered. I chuckled and decided that maybe she could use some help. I tightened my drain plug and climbed out of my pit. Walking over to the adjacent pit, I saw she was wearing coveralls that were a couple of sizes too big. "Do you need some help?" I asked. She turned to face me, and despite being smeared with oil, I could tell she had an attractive face. Spitting out a mouthful of oil, she responded, "Why do you think I need help?" Just because I'm a woman, and women don't know how to change their own oil. No, it just sounded like you might be frustrated, and I thought I could offer a hand. No thanks, I know what I'm doing. I just hate this damn thing. Okay, have a nice day. I went back to my car, finished filling it with oil, and left without seeing her again. The following week, I attended a cocktail party hosted by the commanding general. My invitation came solely because I was the garrison commander, not because I mingled in the elite circles of the 3 general officers and numerous colonels stationed at Fort Leavenworth. I'd grabbed a Coke and was wandering around hoping to find other officers of my age and rank with whom I might share some common ground. I wasn't holding my breath, and true to my expectations, I didn't find anyone. I glanced at my watch and realized I had about 15 minutes left before it would be polite to make my exit. The backyard seemed like a decent place to spend the time, so I headed there. Just as I was about to step outside, I overheard a voice. Anyway, Dad kept insisting that I learn how to take care of things on my own in case I ever got stuck somewhere. So I decided to change my own oil. It took me over an hour, and I ended up covered in oil from my hair to my nails, even in my mouth. I even spilled it on the instruction manual, making it nearly impossible to read. But the worst part was that this really cute guy offered to help me, and I turned him down. If I had any sense, I would have asked for his name and number just to get a chance to talk to him. The group she was with laughed, but another woman's voice soon interjected. What do you mean you would have asked for his name and number? You've never done that before. I know, but there was something about him that made me... I don't know, I can't explain it. Even though I was upset and frustrated, there was just something special about him. Wow. He must have been quite remarkable. I think he was. I smiled to myself and tried to spot the person who had been speaking. I was curious to see what she looked like without the oil. Stepping onto the patio, I looked to my left and then my right. On my right, there were 3 women. One of them seemed to be around my age, maybe a year or 2 younger, but it was hard to tell. Our eyes met for a brief instant before I turned and went back inside, knowing she had recognized me. I found a corner where I could stay out of the way and observe. The 3 women entered and immediately headed for the front door. In most military homes, there's usually a stand with a bowl, saucer, or metal tray just inside the front door, where military guests leave their calling cards with their name and rank, and you were expected to leave one each time you visited. The women approached the tray of calling cards and began sorting through them. They found one card and huddled around to examine it before glancing over at me. I did my best to blend in, but being the sole company grade officer, 2nd lieutenant, 1st lieutenant, or captain, in a room full of field grades, major and above, made the situation rather amusing. It wouldn't have taken much effort for them to identify my card. I was in uniform and the only officer ranked below major. All they needed to do was sift through the cards until they reached mine. Additionally, my uniform's name tag clearly read Reynolds. I debated whether to ask her about her car, which would reveal my identity, or to wait and see what actions they, or specifically she, would take. It had been a long time since I had been on a real date and I was quite eager, but I decided to hold off for now. When my mental protocol timer went off, I headed over to the hostess, Major General Morris T. Woodley's wife, to thank her for the delightful evening. I then located my hat, which was easy to spot since it was the only one on the table without scrambled eggs, gold braid, on its brim. I glanced discreetly at the 3 women who were equally discreetly observing me, doing this twice. The mysterious woman and I had 2 common connections: the general's party and the auto repair shop. While I couldn't linger around the general's residence hoping for a chance encounter, I could wait at the shop. On Saturday morning, I was at the shop taking my time washing and waxing my truck. Just as I was nearing the end of my work, I saw her car pull in. She stepped out not wearing coveralls but jeans and a white t-shirt with sparkling gold designs on the front. My truck was parked inside the building, and she had parked outside. As she got out of her car and started walking towards me, she was intercepted by a man I recognized as a major from the BOQ. He began talking to her, and it seemed like she was trying to distance herself, but he kept her engaged in conversation. We made eye contact for a brief second before I looked away. Since I was done and there were two people waiting for my spot, I couldn't stay any longer and had to leave. Her gaze remained on me as I got into my truck and drove off. I pulled over to the side of the road and waited. Within 5 minutes, I saw her speeding towards me, so I pulled back onto the road and headed for the post exchange, PX, which is the Army's version of Walmart. It was crowded and I had to park quite a distance from the entrance. There were several reserved parking spaces near the door, and the spot closest to the entrance was labeled "Reserved for the Commanding General." Her car was parked there and I almost turned around and went home. I'm glad I didn't. As I walked in, she was standing right inside the door. "Playing hard to get?" she asked first with a smile. "No, ma'am." "Why? Are you trying to win me over?" She burst into laughter. "Interesting question. I'm not sure. Can you be won over?" "Probably, but I'm not easy." She gestured towards the snack stand down the corridor. "Would a Coke help?" I laughed in return. "As long as you don't expect too much." At the snack stand, we each had a Coke. She had a diet one, and she covered both drinks. We sat at a table, and before we knew it, 3 hours had passed. Her phone rang at least 6 times, but she didn't answer. Finally, she checked her watch and jumped up. "Crap, I've got a date. I need to go." I stood up. "Now who's playing hard to get?" We walked to her car, and she drove off to her date. Since I hadn't had a good dinner in ages, I decided to head to the Officers Club. Their prime rib was fantastic. I went back to my BOQ, relaxed for a bit, showered, put on a civilian suit, and made my way to the club. The dining room was closed for a private party, but the grill was open, so I ate there. After finishing my meal, I headed for the exit, and as I passed the dining room, I glanced in. There, right in the doorway, dancing closely together, were the major from the BOQ, and I suddenly realized I didn't know her name. Despite our lengthy conversation, I never asked, and she never offered it. I watched them dance until another couple bumped into them and she looked my way. I turned and made my exit. The BOQ was within walking distance of the club, so I decided to head over. Inside, there was a spacious lobby featuring 2 large TVs, a bar, and a snack table regularly stocked by the Officers Club. I settled in, grabbed a Coke, and watched a rerun of a NASCAR race. After being there for about 2 hours and feeling ready to retire to my room, the major walked in. He got a beer and took a seat in a large chair near mine. He struck up a conversation about the race, and I admitted I wasn't really paying attention. "You're the garrison commander, right?" he asked. "That's right," I replied. He extended his hand. "Ernie Bigelow, Post G3, Operations." "Mark Reynolds, you already know where I work," I said, shaking his hand. We chatted for a while. He was friendly and easy to talk to, so I mentioned that I had seen him dancing at the club earlier. "Your date looked familiar," I remarked. He laughed. "She should. She's General Woodley's daughter, Christina." "Not to pry, but is there something going on between you two?" I asked. He chuckled. "Not at all. No one's getting anywhere with Miss Iceberg. I've dated her a few times, and just when I think I might get somewhere, she shuts me down completely." "Why do you keep trying?" I inquired. He shrugged. "I'm either hoping to warm her up or I'm just a glutton for punishment." He looked at me with a grin. "It's funny you should ask about her because she saw you tonight and asked if I knew who you were. Not wanting any more competition, I told her I didn't." Ernie Bigelow and I ended up becoming friends. 3 days later, Christina Woodley called me and invited me to dinner. I accepted her offer. That evening, while I was sitting in the BOQ lobby, Ernie joined me and said, "I hear you have a date with Christina." "Yes, we're going out for dinner on Friday. How did you find out?" "Because I asked her out first." She didn't hesitate to tell me she had a date, and with whom. Or is it with who? I was surprised to hear that, I replied. She's usually very private about her phone number. Care to share how you got it? I don't actually have it. She never gave it to me. Then how did you manage to get a date with her? You can't just show up at her door. I paused. I didn't ask her out. She called and asked me. I hadn't really considered how she got my number. She had it from the calling card I left at her house and could easily find it in the telephone directory. Ernie looked at me and started laughing. Well, I'll be damned. I've known her for almost 2 years, and she's never asked a guy out before. You must be something special. I'm not sure about that. Listen, she does date occasionally, but very rarely. Since I've been here, she's only dated me and a couple of others. We're a close-knit group and keep track of each other's dating lives, hoping to hear about any progress. So far, it's only been a few close dances and a couple of kisses on the cheek. We spent some time together talking, and as I mentioned, we became friends. He was genuinely sincere in wishing me good luck with Christina. He said, just keep me updated and I'll make sure the other two know about you and your progress. Our dinner date went really well. So well, in fact, that I ended up asking her out again. Things continued on in that manner. Ernie found out he was being reassigned to Korea and asked her out for a farewell dinner, but she declined. According to him, her exact words were, I like Mark, Ernie. I like him a lot. And I don't want to risk that. I always picked her up from her house for our dates and interacted with both her parents. They didn't seem to dislike me, but they also didn't exactly welcome me with open arms. Christina and I had been dating for 6 months, and if you think that second base is touching it, then I reached second base. She mentioned that no one else had ever gotten that far. 7 months into our relationship, I got orders to return to the Middle East. I contacted my branch to clarify. I thought I was on a 3-year stabilized tour, I told my assignments manager. You were, Mark, but it looks like you've upset someone. We've been instructed to reassign you immediately. You need to be there in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Usually people get at least 30 days. I called Christina, and she was even more distressed than I was. After talking for a few minutes, she ended the call with, I love you, Mark. She had never said that before. By 9 that evening, I was packed and set to leave the next morning. Christina was coming over to say goodbye. When there was a knock at my door, I opened it to find her standing there. She stepped into my arms and we shared a kiss. My father did it, she said. Did what? Had you sent away? Why? He knows how I feel about you and he's afraid of losing me. He will eventually, whether to me or someone else. What do you mean, someone else? There isn't anyone else. There might be if I don't come back. She hugged me tightly again. Don't talk like that. She pulled back to look at me. Marry me, she said. What? Marry me. It will really upset him. I chuckled. Getting married just to annoy your father isn't a good reason to marry. She pulled away and sat down in a chair. Then I'll stay here tonight. That will really get to him. I laughed again. I'd love for you to spend the night, but you've just had an argument with your father. Where do you think he'd send the MPs if you don't come home? Then let's head to a motel off-post. I knelt in front of her. I love you. Our first night together shouldn't be about revenge or hiding. It should be about standing tall and proudly declaring our love to the world. She cupped my face in her hands, kissed me, and laughed. I've already done that. Everyone at Leavenworth knows I love you, especially my father. That's why he had you reassigned. We were sitting together in a chair. It's been a long time since I last had intimacy, and having a 26-year-old virgin who was impatient and malleable was very tempting. But my issue was, I loved her, and I wanted our first time to be perfect, and this wasn't it. We were kissing when her phone rang. Hello, Mom, she said, putting the call on speaker. Where are you? I heard her mother ask. At the BOQ with Mark. When are you coming home? When Mark leaves tomorrow. She glanced at me and smiled. There was a sharp intake of breath. You realize your father will kill both of you, don't you? He already did, Mom, when he had Mark transferred. What should I tell him? Tell him I'm an adult and I'll do what I want. Goodbye, Mom. You know the MPs are probably on their way already, I said. I don't care. That's because you'll just be going home. I'll be heading to jail. She threw herself into my arms and we hugged, kissing long and passionately. Then she stared into my eyes. I love you. You know that. I've never been in love before, and I know that you love me too. Do you want to know how I know that? Yes, I replied. Except for the 2 times you touched me, you didn't try to go any further. It shows that you respect me and don't rush things. We both know this is going to happen. You will be the first man to make love to me. She reached back and began to unbutton her blouse. She pulled me closer. No one has ever done this before, she said. I want you to remember this and come back again. I kissed her until I finally had to push her away. We need to stop now. Otherwise we won't stop, I said. I know, but I didn't expect it to be so amazing, she said breathlessly. She put on her blouse again. Just remember that this is mine. No one else will see them or touch them. She kissed me and smiled. They are yours forever. She looked at me and left with tears in her eyes. Early the next morning, I waited for his arrival at Major General Woodley's headquarters. When his driver pulled up, I was there to open the door for him. He looked surprised to see me, although of course he knew who I was. Why are you here, Captain? He inquired. I'm here to tell you exactly what kind of a cowardly father I think you are. You might be a capable general, but as a parent, you fail miserably. You can assign me anywhere you wish, including the federal penitentiary on the other side of this base. But I'm going to speak my mind. I care deeply for your daughter, and she says she loves me. This might be new to you because if I read the situation correctly, she's never been in love before, and it scares you. You fear losing her to another man someday, whether it's me, Ernie Bigelow, some private in boot camp, or a civilian doctor. One day you will lose her, and I hope it hurts you as much as your attempts to manipulate and transfer me hurt her. When you see her at dinner tonight, I want you to know that you've shattered her heart because you have. She might easily forget about me in the coming year, which I'm sure is what you're hoping for. But she will fall in love again, and perhaps again. Each time she does, you'll lose a bit more of her until she eventually despises you. I didn't even bother to salute him as I walked away. I fully expected to be stopped and thrown in jail as I left the post, but that didn't happen. I drove to my sister Ruth's house and then went to visit my parents. I planned to leave my truck with them while I was away and put what few personal belongings I had into storage. I spent a day with Ruth, during which she updated me on my ex-wife. It turns out that she was so passionate about intimacy that she began to behave like a girl of easy virtue. Her parents cut ties with her after they saw a video of her with 2 men and refused to speak to her after she moved out. Her brother, who had been Ruth's former boyfriend, also severed all ties with her. She has been arrested at least 3 times and is currently in prison. After leaving Ruth's place, I spent 3 days with my parents. I spoke with Christina several times before my departure and learned that on the day I left Leavenworth, she moved out of her parents' house and into a furnished apartment in town, which greatly upset her father. She refused to talk to him, and according to her mother, he was torn between being angry and hurt, so he was both. Upon arriving at my departure point, I checked in. The sergeant at the counter reviewed my orders, excused himself, and went into the office behind him. He returned a few minutes later with a first lieutenant. Captain Reynolds, could you please step into my office? The lieutenant asked. I followed him. Have a seat, Captain. He took a moment to gather his thoughts. Your orders have been altered. It appears that your original orders were issued by mistake. Fort Leavenworth is investigating the issue, but here are your new orders. You are to return to Leavenworth and resume your previous duties." He shrugged. "I've never seen anything like this. Orders can be changed, but I've never seen a situation where a service member was reassigned to their old post. And on top of that, we received this yesterday via personal courier to be delivered to you." He handed me a sealed envelope with the return address of the commanding general, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The lieutenant handed me my new orders. "Congratulations, Captain. You're going home." Stepping outside, I opened the envelope. It simply read, "You were right," and was signed by M. Woodley. I immediately called Christina, and she answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "I'm heading home. Did you know my orders got canceled?" "You're joking. What happened?" "It seems your father changed his mind. I'm heading back to Leavenworth." "Oh my God. How soon can you get here?" "In a couple of days. I need to pick up my truck first, then I'll drive from there." "Hurry, sweetie. I'll start looking for a bigger apartment." I made record time getting back. We stayed on the phone for the last 50 miles, and she rushed to meet me as I pulled onto her street. The truck had barely stopped before I was out of it and into her arms. We kissed and hugged while traffic navigated around us. In military towns, homecomings in unusual places are common. After a few minutes, we finally settled inside, where we continued to kiss and hug. After the initial excitement had settled, we sat together on her couch and talked. She'd spoken with her mother, but not her father. Her mother was unaware of the change in my orders, but seemed pleased for her daughter when she was informed. I showed her the brief note I had received from her father. "What does this mean?" she asked. I explained my meeting with him the morning I left. "I'm surprised he didn't have you arrested for speaking to him that way," she remarked. "Me too." "I'm sure it went against everything he values to alter your orders," she said. "He didn't do it for me. He did it for you because he loves you and is struggling to accept that he is no longer the only man in your life." She looked at me with nothing but love in her eyes. I returned her gaze, stood up, and took out the ring I had bought in Tennessee when I stopped to pick up my truck. I got down on one knee. Before I could say a word, she was already crying. "Christina Louise Woodley, will you marry me?" Without hesitation, she dropped to both knees, extended her left hand, and said, "Put it on my finger." As soon as the ring was in place for the next 50 years, she spoke again. "Yes, Mark Hadley Reynolds. I will marry you and love you until the day I die." The kiss we shared was transformative. I felt it deeply in my body and soul, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would spend the rest of my life loving this woman. Every man believes his wife or girlfriend is the most beautiful and perfect person in the world, and I was no exception. I suggested staying at a luxury hotel for our first night together, but she declined. "This apartment is our first home. I want our first night to be spent here, in our new home." She had time to prepare for my return, and she did it her way. For our first meal in the apartment, we had champagne, pâté, and chocolate-covered strawberries. I even enjoyed some of the bubbly. Before the festivities began, she wanted to take a bubble bath. Afterward, she emerged in a baby blue ensemble consisting of lingerie, a bra, and a cover-up that complemented the outfit perfectly. While she was opening the champagne and pâté, I took a very quick shower and stepped into the bedroom wearing only a bathrobe. We sat on the bed, ate, and drank. We kissed from time to time. Gradually, the eating stopped and the kissing intensified until the food tray was empty. We stood by the bed and she untied the belt of my robe. Holding the robe, she looked into my eyes. "This is the first time I've ever done this, Mark. I've always dreamed of doing this with the true love of my life, and that's you. I know people call me the Ice Queen, but I promise that I will do my best to become what you want when the time comes." With these words, we moved on to the best moment of my life. We finally wore ourselves out around 4 in the morning. Her phone woke us up at 10. "Hello, Mom," she said cheerfully, putting the call on speaker as usual. "Good morning. Any news from Mark? Isn't he supposed to be back today?" She glanced at me and smiled widely. "He came home yesterday and spent the night with me, Mom." "Oh, well then." "He proposed, Mom, and I said yes." Her excitement was palpable. "That's wonderful. When's the wedding?" Christina laughed. "We don't have a date yet. We thought we'd talk about it with you and Dad tonight at dinner. Is that okay?" This was news to me, so I just stared at her with wide eyes, thinking that she was a little out of her mind. She looked at me and winked. "It sounds tempting. What kind of wine does he prefer?" "He doesn't usually drink, but he's going to have champagne with us now." "Good. I'll see you both at 6:30. Is this normal?" "Great. See you then." "Oh, should I tell your father, or would you rather do it yourself?" "You can tell him if you think he can handle it. Otherwise, we'll leave it to Mark." When the conversation ended, she looked at me and said, "Damn it, the groom." It was a request that I was always ready to fulfill. We rang the doorbell at 6:30. Her father answered. "Why did you call?" "You have the key," he told his daughter. "I know, but I don't live here anymore, Daddy." I saw him wince slightly, but he visibly perked up when his daughter hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. I heard her whisper, "Thank you," as she kissed him. It wasn't easy for him. He held out his hand to shake mine, which I did. "Dinner is ready, so let's eat," he said. We were sitting in a small family dining room, not the one used for large gatherings. Christina and I were sitting on opposite sides of the table. The champagne had already been served. "Dad, Mom, Mark would like to say something." I took a deep breath. "First of all, General Woodley, I want to express my gratitude for your help in having my orders rescinded." I phrased it that way, fully aware that he was solely responsible for both the issuance and the cancellation of those orders. "Secondly, General Woodley and Mrs. Woodley, I want you to know that I love your daughter and have asked her to marry me." "And I said yes," Christina chimed in, extending her hand first to her mother and then to her father. Her mother beamed with joy, while her father, I'm sure, had been instructed to accept the news gracefully and avoid any awkwardness. He was polite enough to propose a toast. After dinner, the two women went off to start making wedding plans, while the General and I retreated to the library, where he poured 2 glasses of port. "I know you don't drink alcohol except on special occasions. I suppose this makes for 2 such occasions in one evening," he said. I took the small glass. "Congratulations, Mark. You've achieved something I never thought I'd see." He took a sip and gestured for us to sit. "I knew this day would come eventually, but—" He shifted the tone of the conversation. "You were right in your critique of me. I thought I knew what was best for my daughter, but seeing how she looked at you during dinner made me realize how wrong I was. All I ask is that you take care of her and love her for the rest of her life the way you love her today. You can count on it, sir. I will never do anything to intentionally hurt her." "I believe that," he said, looking at me. "But there's one thing I'm struggling with." "What's that, sir?" "I don't like the idea of you two living together before the wedding." Christina's mother must have mentioned it to him. "You don't really have a choice, sir." I didn't think so, but I wanted to voice my concerns. 6 months after that dinner, Christina's father retired and took on a role as CEO of a major automobile parts procurement division. 2 months later, Christina and I got married. She was visibly pregnant as she walked down the aisle. My brother Matthew appeared with his Nashville megastar, who gave an impromptu performance at our reception. He also gave Christina's parents copies of all his CDs. Matthew mentioned that my parents only listened to gospel music, so the star provided several copies of his gospel recordings. The day after we returned from our honeymoon, Ernie Bigelow called me. He congratulated me and mentioned that he had won $1,000 from 2 other guys who were dating Christina. They argued with him that I would fail in the end, just like them. Ernie did not agree, and as a result, he got extra money. 2 months after the wedding, our son Jason Richard Reynolds was born. 6 months later, I resigned from my position and started working for my father-in-law. Jason became attached to his grandfather almost from the moment he learned to walk, and they became inseparable. My father-in-law was always jealous when we took Jason with us to visit my parents. During one of our trips to Tennessee, my sister Ruth told me about my ex-wife. Apparently, after her release from prison, she got involved in the adult film industry. She was doing well until it turned out that she was mailing some of her artistic creations. The federal government does not approve of this. As a result, she faces a prison sentence of 3 to 5 years. One weekend, Jason was at Grandma and Grandpa Woodley's lake house. Christina and I were home alone, cuddled up on the sofa watching a chick flick. She turned to me and asked, "Mark?" "Yes?" "Do you enjoy being a father?" "Absolutely. Why do you ask?" "Would you want another child?" I leaned back and gave her a puzzled look. "Are you saying you're pregnant?" She placed her hand on my lap and began to gently rub it. "No, but I'd like to be."